Hey everyone, welcome to the A to Z of Sex, or the A to Z of Sex if you're in North America. I'm Dr. Beth Bisbey. I'm a psychologist, sex and intimacy coach, and a gender, sex, and relationship diversity therapist. And I am working my way through the erotic alphabet one letter at a time. I created this podcast to help you learn to express your desires, learn more about desires, spice up your relationships, and create those sizzling relationships that you have always wanted. I do this through solid science, real-life stories, and conversations with an exciting array of experts. Listen in weekly as I share key strategies that will help you choose the relationship style that works best for you and create exactly what you want and need. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes and you can take advantage of the subscriber bonuses. And if you want to know more, head over to drloribethbisbey.com and sign up for my email list so that you can find out exactly what is going on in my world from week to week. But for now, come join me and enter my world of sex and relationships. See you inside. Hey everyone, welcome to the A to Z of Sex with me, Dr. Beth Bisbey. I'm a psychologist, an accredited advanced gender, sex, and relationship diversity therapist, a sex and intimacy coach, and I have spent the last 35 years helping people to create and maintain incredible relationships that contain sizzling sex and without shame. We are working our way through the erotic alphabet one letter at a time. And this week, the letter is X, and X is for exasperated. Yes, I know that's not appropriate spelling, but you try finding loads of things for the letter X. And joining me today is Barry Lynn. Barry Lynn has been on the show before, but to refresh your memory, he is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. He's a member of the Supreme Court Bar, and he's written several books and done lots of other interesting things that we'll talk about. But his new book is the only one he's actually satisfied with. And his new book is a memoir. So I'm welcoming you to the show. It's lovely to have you.
It's great to be back here. It really is. This is the only book. It's actually 3 books.
Mm-hmm.
There was a high school student who came up to me at a party. He said, Mr. Lynn, I want to do what you do when I get out of school. And I looked at him and I said, what is it you think I do? And he said, I think you get paid to piss people off. And of course, it fits in so well with this.
And so you named the book Paid to Piss People Off, and it's true, isn't it?
Yes, I've done a lot of that. I mean, I like to think that it's an important part of what activists need to do to get attention to their cause, to use the rules of government against government. I'm not an anarchist, but I sure think most of what government does is detrimental to who human beings are. And nothing so much as in the world's realms of religion and, of course, sexuality.
So this is, apropos, given what's going on in the world, that we are now in an incredible battleground around sexuality and gender again. But one that now the pressure of the craziness, in my view, is coming from both the left and the right. It's now gotten really crazy on the left, and it's always been really crazy on the right. So you have some longevity in this. What do you think about what's going on?
I think that it is true that there's craziness on the left and the right, but I have to say, I think the super craziness is still on the right.
True.
And when it came to pornography, which is something we talked about when I was on the show last time, there's some interesting criticisms from left-wing feminists. I don't deny that they're feminists. I just think they're wrong about this. Maybe we can talk about that. But most of the efforts to censor material now is coming from the extreme right.
Absolutely.
Perhaps your listeners heard of an incident in the state of Florida just a couple of weeks ago where a woman was forced to resign her job as a teacher because she showed sixth graders a photograph of Michelangelo's statue of David.
Yeah.
Now, that was so bizarre, but I remember back in 25 years ago or so, when I was following the Pornography Commission set up under the Ronald Reagan administration, that I walked into a room one day and they were having a debate. Here, these government officials having a debate about whether Michelangelo's David was in fact pornographic, because you could see the penis.
The absurdity of that and the hypocrisy of that. So it's okay if we sexualize women.
Yeah.
It's always okay if we sexualize women. But to see the penis not in a state of arousal, not in even relationship to anybody, merely as a portion of the anatomy,
Exactly.
is somehow pornographic.
The two people who on that commission of 13 people, the two people who were most convinced it was pornographic, one of them was a Catholic priest who turned out, according to a number of journalists and the state attorney general in New York, he apparently was paying young men, not children, to stay with him in his hotel room. He was later asked to leave New York, and he served a lot of the rest of his time, I guess, talking to cows in India. And the other was Dr. James Dobson. James Dobson may be known to some of your listeners. He started out as a commentator on CBS radio, and he gave parental advice. And, you know, some of it wasn't too terrible. But then he turned to a very, very dark side. He started railing against the Playboy philosophy. He started the lobbying group, probably the most homophobic, anti-sex, anti-common sense lobbying group in the United States. And he too he was really upset. James Dobson came up to me one day in a restaurant about a year after, because I traveled around the country watching this Pornography Commission. He came up to me in a restaurant. He said, "You know, Barry, I hate everything you stand for, but I tell you, you destroyed all the good work we tried to do." And, you know, there wasn't any good work. And to the extent that they even listened to, at the time, kind of the occasional feminist critique of pornography, they didn't understand it. They took nothing from it. And it was just terrible. There were 4 women on the commission, 3 of whom dissented from its conclusions. And it was kind of a surprise, because most people thought, oh, they're women, they will be horrified by all of this. One was, she had been a former editor at Cosmopolitan magazine. And then at the time of the commission, she was the editor of Woman's Day. One day, since I traveled around with them, there's a wonderful feminist writer in New York. And she and I kind of dogged them around, and we went to Houston, Texas. They wanted to go on a field trip of porn stores.
A field trip?
A field trip on a bus. We actually sat on a bus, and we go into a couple of these. These are sleazy places. I mean, these are not the kind of sex shops that you find in United States shopping malls now, you know, where the bright lights, dildos all lined up on the basis of color and size. These are places where there's water running down the floor. So we get to the third one, which is possibly the worst. And at the time in the United States, this was before there were DVDs. If you wanted pornography, you had to go to an adult theater, or you had to go to one of these adult stores. So we went in and bought tokens. At the time, you took a little token, you put it in, some porn. And there were buddy booths where you could watch with your friends, or perhaps watch and do something else. So here I am with Ellen Levine and the chairman of the Porn Commission, a man named Henry Hudson, who now regrettably is actually a federal judge in the United States.
Oh my.
Yeah. So we're watching two gay men wearing green monster masks having a sexual encounter. So Henry says to me, so Barry, when you testified before us, you said all of these images, all of this material has messages. What do you think the message is here? And I looked at Henry and I said, try it, you might like it. Ellen was hard pressed at the time to refrain from laughing because she had already turned sour. And there was a psychiatrist from Columbia University, and I had had lunch with her a week before. She interviewed and did studies both of rape victims and of rapists. And toward the end of this conversation, she said, you know, Barry, I have never seen in my clinical practice a single rapist who was a rapist because of pornography. And, you know, but these are the things that people in that commission did not want to talk about. They thought if you found, and I think most of the anti-porn forces around the world think if you find the worst, the single worst image you could possibly find, that will convince people that every bit of sexually explicit material is menacing and dangerous to everyone.
Well, and it's unfortunate because people don't understand that there's just no evidence that this is true. And in fact, if anything, this pornography sometimes acts as a kind of release valve for people. They also don't know how to read research. So that's my other bugbear. My other bugbear is most definitely the one that says they believe that a relationship is causation, which is always given me a problem. Sure. The relationship, they don't understand. Like if you look at things like they'll say there's a relationship between violent pornography and rapists. Yeah, rapists like violent sex, so they watch more pornography. That's more likely to be the relationship than the violent pornography caused the rapists.
Absolutely, and I think the evidence that you're talking about is really overwhelming. I mean, there's nobody, even people who say 20 years ago, when the Smeese Commission was floating around, even the people who found what they initially claimed was some kind of connection between violence in cinema, pornography, and R-rated movies. By the time the commission got done examining it, critiquing, mixing up, messing up the research that these people did, they started to kind of flip out, and there was a big article in the Washington Post newspaper about how their own evidence had been misused by the Porn Commission. I remember I was on a Good Morning America show with a woman from New York who was the leader of something called Women Against Pornography. And she went on about this, it causes rape. And I said, look, it doesn't cause rape. Here's what it might be. It's not a recipe book for rape. It might be just a recipe book for masturbation. Then the host of the show, at the end, I said, you know, I probably shouldn't have said masturbation. And she said, we'll get a lot of mail about that. But, you know, but you shouldn't get it's the religious right has so captured these issues. They spend literally millions and millions of dollars, not just on their favorite candidates, but also trying to suppress this material. I mentioned a few minutes ago that I like to use the instruments of government against government. I'm not an anarchist, but there's sure a lot I don't like. When the Pornography Commission was established, they set certain rules. And one of those dopiest from the perspective of history is they said, we're not going to ever comment on our work until we're finished with the process, which gave me like a whole year where I could go out and criticize everything they said. And then when they'd go to talk to Henry Hudson or members of the Pornography Commission, they would say, we have no comment on that. We're waiting. So one time they were having a discussion about the prospect of having a total national ban on sex toys. So I heard about that, and I was there, and so I called a couple of the people who were most friendly to non-censorship in the media. I said, well, here they are. They're considering a total ban on sex toys. And so the Washington Post the next day had, Porn Commission considers sex toy ban. Needless to say, that idea did not come to fruition.
But there's still laws, but there are laws
I
about
know.
sex toys in the United States.
Absolutely. There are several
There's
states.
Utah, you can't, no, Nevada, you can't have a sex toy. So prostitution is legal in Nevada,
Yes,
but sex toys are not.
right. Well, but the whole thing, when we think about sex, we think about it as a culture in the worst and dumbest possible ways. I don't know if you knew this woman named Annie Sprinkle, who was in a lot of.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
So-
amazing woman.
And she passed out a little thing during, I don't think they invited her to testify, but she passed out this leaflet that said, I think pornography sometimes is bad for people, sometimes it's good for people, sometimes it hurts people, most times it doesn't. But she said openly and honestly, you have to look at this from the perspective of how it affects people, good, bad, and otherwise. And I think, that's kind of what I think. I was interviewed by somebody last week, and he said, how can you as a minister, how can you defend pornography? I said, because I recognize there's a difference between morality and legality. And
Thank you.
I may not like every pornographic image, but I'm not the measure of that. I think the standard for, we have this obtuse definition of pornography in the United States, but the community standard that should matter is the community that consists of you and your bedroom. That's it. You go beyond that and you're starting to intrude dramatically on the right of people to be and do what they want and to see what they want.
It's really difficult because the censorship is so bad at this point that, and I think I mentioned this before, that because of Sesta Fosta and an effort to protect children, and that's often the thing that's used, well, we're going to protect children. I have to say that in my experience working in this field, including working in family court for over 30 years as an expert, lots of pedophiles actually do things like look at clothing catalogs. Like they can get stimulated by, going to the sea and watching the children at the seaside or the pool.
Sure.
They don't necessarily need pornography. And the pornography that they access is not the pornography that's available to the general public. I mean, it's not the pornography that ends up getting censored. It's their own specialist pornography, and it's, under the table, so it's not what you're going to see on your pay-per-view website.
No,
or in the old days on the DVDs, right? It
Correct.
just is. And so I found myself in the position of an expert, often saying to people, I am not the morality police.
Yeah.
My job is not to say whether or not it's a good thing that this woman is a porn actress. That's not my job, right?
No.
I have my own views, and my own views are, if she's not coerced and she's happy doing what she's doing, more power to you. But it's not my job. My job, where there's children involved, is to make sure that the boundaries are good so that there is no harm or neglect. That's my job.
Exactly.
And Sesta Fosta meant that all of the educational stuff, I mean, I'm still constantly censored for educational stuff, right?
Sure.
In fact, we're more censored than the pornography is.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Speaking of censorship, I attempted to take an advertisement out on Twitter, now controlled by Elon, I am in favor of free speech, Musk.
Yes.
I tried to take it out. I submitted the ad. It had the title of the book, Paid to Piss People Off, about an hour later, I received a note saying that I could not advertise because of inappropriate content. Now,
What the hell is inappropriate?
the word piss.
Oh my
People
God.
off. Now, see, in 1972, there was a great comedian in the United States named George Carlin.
Yes.
George Carlin did a routine called Seven Dirty
Seven
Words. And guess what? This was
This
one
was
of
one
those
of them.
words. So that, and then I thought, okay, so they don't want to take an ad. Then they took down my posting that used the same word. And I decided not to fight it because I called a couple people up and they said, just add to your publicity that you've been banned by Twitter. But
Yeah. Well, no, and so I mean, you know, George Carlin's routine, the seven words you can't say on television, was one of my favorite routines. I grew up on that. I passed that on. We could all say it word for word because we learned it when we were, you know, teenagers.
Sure.
But it's amazing to me. I have never managed successfully to take out an ad on Twitter or on Facebook. I have had, because they look at what I do and it says sex in what I do, and they censor me there. And, you know, I've tried and I just gave up. What I know people who have looked at this for the industry and for the sex education industry, for the sex and wellness industry, as well as for the adult entertainment industry. And actually social media as a means for getting the word out for us or driving traffic or customers is useless. We have to use our own websites and we have to use our search engine optimization because otherwise people won't find us. I have a television show that I'm on. You know, we're about to the second season is coming out sometime in the next month and a half. It's called Open House, The Great Sex Experiment. That's a television show on Channel 4 in the United Kingdom. So one of the terrestrial channels. And I have had posts taken down on every single social media site because it says sex experiment, the great sex experiment.
We had an interesting kerfluffle, I guess it was worldwide, over a website called OnlyFans.
Yes.
OnlyFans, of course, is generally has a lot of adult performers. And during the COVID time, I don't know many of the current, you know, adult film actresses, but I used to know many of them. And there was an effort by credit card companies not to take any kind of, and it irritated me, but the comedians that used it, they said, you know, Barry, you ought to tell some stories. So I applied, you have to fill out a form. And again, the title, they wouldn't touch it. There is a wonderful, I hope it's streaming everywhere, including in Scotland and Britain. It's called Money Shot, and it's about Pornhub, which is a great.
Yes, I've seen it.
Yeah, and I assumed, frankly, when I watched it, that it would be one of these, oh, it's terrible, everything is horrible. It had these wonderful adult actresses that, including ones that by conventional standards are not beautiful people.
No.
But they're talking about how important it is. And they did toward the end of the thing, probably last 90 minutes. Toward the end, they said, you know, we can't find much evidence of anybody being coerced into performing. And
there was so much with that because they really tried to make the slant of the show about, you know, it's ultimately, they had this one woman who kept saying everything is coercive. And I was looking at the larger woman, the curvy woman is the one you're talking about. I can't remember her name, but she won awards, right? And she was like, do I look like I'm easily coerced, right?
Exactly.
What I find so frustrating about a lot of this is that, and that was the left wing having an issue with it. That wasn't the right wing. The left wing's issue is that let me make sure I'm getting this correct. All porn, although it's got a slant now. It used to be all porn is inherently coercive,
right? Because
it devalues women. However, there's a new slant to it. Queer porn is acceptable.
Yes.
But anything that might have any kind of a heterosexual bent is inherently Definitely not. Which I'm
Right.
like, so really you think you get a right to control people's desires? Like, I'm trying to expand people's horizons. I'm not telling people who are heterosexual that they don't get to desire what they desire, but apparently you can't choose that desire because it's inculcated into you because of the how you're brought up culturally, which I find actually quite offensive.
Yeah,
That
it is. And
people believe that people with brains can't actually deconstruct some of that.
right. The two things you just mentioned. One is the issue of children. The Pornography Commission had, in its very first meeting, one of these FBI agents who made his entire career out of fighting smut. But he did concede that pedophiles generally, when you look at their collections, they almost always have a copper tone advertisement, for a sunscreen.
Yeah, the
with
one with the
a girl,
with the
yeah,
butt.
with the dog pulling down
Yeah.
partially. And if that turns you on, man, you can't predict that. You cannot make a distinction. You cannot draw on science to help you define what is going to bother people and why. But anybody with any sexual interest at all is certainly going to be bothered by some of what exists in the realm of pornography.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, and I had worked at the time for the American Civil Liberties Union, and I really worked hard to be their point person against this pornography suppression. And I did think that there was one thing in American law that ought to be extended, and that is the concept of sexual privacy. I think if you have, for example, an underage person or a person who was coerced into making pornography, that individual should have a right under American law to go make his or her case and then have something happen because of it. And the ACLU at the time kind of, no, they didn't want to do that. And I understand why, because the ACLU, and I agree with them, you don't want to restrict minors' access to abortion services, to contraception on the basis of their age alone. I do understand that, but this is very different. The ACLU at the time actually supported some laws in the state of New York that prohibited the intrusion on privacy caused by, let's say, I mean, the director at the time of the ACLU was a guy named Ira Glasser. So let's say Ira Glasser, they put up a picture of him on a billboard in Times Square next to some product he doesn't want, implying that so they're taking his commercial advantage and they're doing that. And I said, this is very similar to the kind of thing I was suggesting. And another thing that comes up in the movie in Money Shot is the fact that credit card use for things like dial-a-porn, if that even still exists. There was a congressman, a very conservative congressman for Virginia named Bliley. Congressman Bliley was a huge supporter of mine when I was trying to prohibit them curtailing cigarette advertisements. And I went in to his office once and I said, this First Amendment we have, it works best when it's seamless, when it covers everybody. And when you cannot use the argument, well, a child might see a cigarette billboard and start smoking. Nobody ever thought that was a primary issue in starting to smoke. Nobody ever, including the most liberal, consumer advocates in the United States. But I did think that was important, and I said, why don't you tell the anti-porn people we're going to restrict this, but we're going to require credit cards, and the right-wing groups came back and said, we can't do that. Well, somebody might steal their father's credit card. Yes, there might be. It would not be perfect. But if you simply wanted because at the time you could literally call from one state into another state. I'm having a little construction done here. I'm gonna like to
We're
go
okay.
over-
We don't hear it.
Oh,
So if
okay,
you want to,
okay.
yeah.
But they rejected that, and of course, nothing changed. I mean, nothing changed.
So what's interesting to me is that people don't seem to be able to understand that what I might want censored, you don't want censored. And that if we're going to have free speech, then I have to be able to say, okay, they're not censoring me, but they're also not censoring you. They don't seem to be able to get that idea that the danger remains who is making the decisions on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And now we have this idiocy in the United States, in Florida, where of the banned books, there was one banned that was a book on Hanukkah.
Yeah.
That was what it was. It was just a book of Jewish practice.
Yeah.
And another one was a book on colors, which I cannot figure out for the life of me why they banned it. It was just, this is red, this is purple, this is blue, right? But they banned it.
Oh,
So that we've got that level of idiocy in some states. We've got the law in Nevada that says you can't have any sex toys, but in Texas you can have 6. You can have 6 dildos, but no more.
well, you got to rest on Sundays. I'm sure that's the reason there isn't.
It says that probably, but in Texas you can't get, a woman can't get health care now.
No, of course. I mean,
Because it's so frightening, but they have laws about dildos on the books.
Right.
That's important.
it is the censorship of material that is not at first blush, or even if you're blushing 5 times, anything sexual. I've been a big supporter of something called the Kurt Vonnegut Library and Museum. And it's a marvelous, and during the Porn Commission days, it was my only time I met Kurt Vonnegut, but I think he to me, he started me reading. I mean, I love the Cat's Cradle and some of the early books, and I read them, and I finally got to meet him. And so they had a press conference. It was Kurt Vonnegut, myself, and Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminine Mystique. And we all just, properly dumped on the Pornography Commission and what it was doing. And that's the kind of breadth. I am sure Betty Friedan would not have gone into porno's store and go, oh, I like everything. That's not the point. The point is, if you don't like it, please don't use children as the excuse for controlling what adults can see. In this book, I talk a lot about all these efforts to suppress things, ideas, images. And I said, if everybody got their way, if everybody who said, we shouldn't have X or Y or Z, we'd be relegated to sitting in darkened caves. And if they had any electricity, they would only have snow and the pages would be blank. Judy Blume is a great
gosh. Yes.
She and I were on a panel one day somewhere in the Caribbean. I'm sure it was a nice place. So I said to her one, but Judy, what's the weirdest thing you ever heard about being censored? And she said, well, that's easy. Mad Libs. Mad Libs was a series of books in the 60s and 70s. It had the framework of a story and then a lot of blanks. And so and then the person doing it would say to the audience, give me a noun, give me an adverb.
Yeah, it was great.
I said to Judy, so what was bad about that? And she said, nothing in the book, but they censored it because they didn't think children could be safely allowed to insert words. Talking about thought police.
I mean, so when you say that, I was born in 1963. So I was born in 1963. Judy Blume's book, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, was apropos for me to when those things were happening. Like it was, and it was the first book. So for those of you who don't know, her book was about periods, right? It was about a young girl's transformation into womanhood. and how scary that was and how bizarre that was and all the changes that went with it. It was written for the young adult market. It was phenomenal for young girls who were reading it at the time, right? It was perfect. And it was censored. And it was
All the
censored.
time.
It was censored because it had to do with periods, and we didn't talk about periods. I contrast
Right.
that right now with what's going on the internet, where everybody wants to have a period, right? So, and people don't seem to have an understanding of what a period is. Perhaps that's because Judy Blume was censored, because we learned a lot there, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, we had Mad Libs, and that was a summer camp favorite. Like we
Sure.
had those. We fought to have those, and we would go, and that was the thing that the kids did for years and years and years. And yet you're right, they were censored. Well, of course, we used to put all sorts of stuff in there that illustrated the fact that we didn't understand how sex worked or anatomy worked, because we had, we were too young, and, and there was no information, because sex education back then, well, I guess it was better than now. I mean, we got anatomy, and we got menstruation, and we got procreation, and a little bit about diseases. And now half of America doesn't get anything.
No.
So I guess it was better. I don't know. I thought it was pretty crappy, but.
Yeah, I think it was. They did a survey back in the early 70s about whether they interviewed students who had just gotten out of high school, and they asked them, did you have a sex education course? And a vast number of people who had it didn't know they'd even been taught sex education.
No, because they didn't. Why would they know?
In Florida, of course, the Governor DeSantis has decided you can't talk about menstruation there either.
I know, which is just ridiculous.
But it's a fear. It's hard, I think, for people to understand just how frightening the subject of sexuality, the subject of alternative religious viewpoints, that these things are so terrifying to people. There's a book called Charlotte's Web, which is a wonderful children's book.
Fabulous.
And it's been censored many places because it has talking animals in it. The last time.
So the Christians think that those are demons, do they?
It could be, but more importantly, there are no talking animals in the Bible. So one of my last invitations to be on the Fox News channel, they wanted me to get up at 5 in the morning to talk to a guy who had drawn a series of cartoons called Veggie Tales, where vegetables act out Bible stories. And I think, man, his theory was, if you as a parent allow your child to watch any other cartoons other than Veggie Tales, they will become atheists. What an amazing thing. It used to be that I went to seminary. I don't remember how talking animals, bad, talking vegetables, that's okay. That should be.
Well, but the literalness for me is the thing. The picking and choosing of the literalness. If you're going to be literal, do me a favor, be literal about the whole fucking thing. Excuse me, but that's how I feel, right? And I swear on this show, so it's okay. But everybody can swear on this show. We don't censor words. But so if you're going to be literal about the whole fucking book, I have read the whole fucking book. Yeah. I was raised Jewish. I'm still Jewish, but I'm not observant because Jewish is an ethnicity. It's not a religion. It's also the name of the religion that Jews have is Judaism, right? So, I've actually read it, and I've read the subsequent books. I've read the Talmud, and I've read the Christian books. Right. So if you want to be literal, by all means, be fucking literal. None of this was ever meant to be literal, but if that's what you're going to do, do it the whole hog. Stop cherry picking what you're going to be literal with. It drives me nuts. I'm like, oh, you're going here and you're saying we can't do this. But over here, like, where is the prohibition against abortion?
Yeah, that would be nowhere.
That would be nowhere, because actually in the Jewish part of these books, in certain circumstances, you're required.
Correct.
Now, was there misogyny in the Torah? Abso-fucking-lutely. If a woman got raped and she was single, she got married to a rapist. I mean, right there, it's a beautiful example of fucked upness in the Bible. But it just drives me crazy that And I see some of these preachers, and I think, why can't people think critically when they look at that? If this is the word of God, how come there are so many different Christian sects?
Yeah, I do as I still am invited to, be in churches and give sermons. And one of my favorite ones is called something like Why Bible Literalism and Constitutional Originalism Are the Worst Ways to Make Policy in America. And it's true. And it's just shocking to see the number of people who, as you say, cherry pick, and then that's supposed to be everything in it. But if you challenge somebody on the religious right, they throw back some kind of Bible quote for you, you cannot change their mind. It doesn't matter what it
No,
is.
it doesn't matter if you actually point out to them that either A, they got the quote wrong, or B, they used the wrong part of the quote.
Exactly.
My husband is, he was raised Baptist. And what he used to do with the pastors, and he left the faith because he saw the inconsistencies, and he's a very bright man, and he could quote chapter and verse at you. So they would quote something and he'd turn around and go, but blah, 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 and they'd look at it, so, they're embedded. There's nothing you're going to say to change their mind. I think one of the things that we do wrong is we attempt to change people's minds in certain ways. When it's coming from a place of belief, and I don't even want to say a place of faith, because I see faith as something different.
Sure.
When it's coming from a place of belief, and it is a fixed belief, there is nothing I'm going to be able to do to shift that, bar some very special psychological therapy that they have to be willing to engage in, right? You're not going to shift the belief. What you can hope to do is say, okay, that's your belief, and there's some other things over here, and can we have room for the other things?
Sure.
But the mistake we make is we challenge their beliefs, and we try and fight on the belief level. That never works.
No, it's I can't say never. I want to tell you one thing. One of the leaders of the anti-choice in terms of reproductive care was a guy named the Reverend Rob Schenck. And Rob Schenck, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I had a debate with him, we'd probably both be wealthy. And I heard that he was changing his mind on some issues. And so I called him up, and I said, I interview people for this podcast most weeks. And I said, would you come on the podcast? Tell me about your journey particularly over abortion. And he changed his mind totally. And he says on the podcast, I was in jail one day, and there was a woman in a cell not too far. She had 4 children. She was pregnant again. She was crying. She was wailing. I said, what's wrong? She said, I can't have another baby. And so I thought, what? And then at the end of the podcast, he apologizes to me. He just says, you were right. I should have listened to you 30 years ago, but I didn't. And then I said, why don't you blurb that? Write a little thing for my book. So he wrote this. I observed Barry Lynn during the difficult dance between faith and social policy for 3 decades, regretfully, mainly as his ideological nemesis. Too late in life, I concluded that he was mostly right and I was mostly wrong. This memoir helps me make up for lost time and might even allow others to do the same. It's a great story. He's very open. He now refers to some of the people that he used to work with as snake handlers. And he made the news right before the Democrats lost control of the House. They invited him to testify about something that he used to do, which he now repudiates. he used to hook up Supreme Court justices with wealthy Republican donors. He said that was terrible. And he's now, being pilloried, of course, by the right. But he
that's
came to a conclusion
criminal.
based
It's
on
not-
the evidence, based on human people.
I love that he came to the conclusion based on the evidence, but what incenses me is that it is not above board. It's not legal. It's not acceptable. The judiciary is supposed to be separate. So anything that has politicians being hooked up
Sure.
and money flowing towards them makes a mockery of the system. It just makes a complete mockery of the
Oh,
system.
it does.
We've
does.
got some similar craziness going on here. We've got, oh my God. We've got the situation with Boris Johnson and various other MPs where you can see their behavior has been contrary to what the law said and their own rules. But one of the worst ones for me is Suella Braverman. And I mean, she's our, foreign secretary. Her views on immigration are petrifying. And one of the worst lines was, she is a child of immigrants. Her parents would not be allowed in this country based on the view that she has now. And she says, and she thinks that's okay.
Wow.
And it's so offensive. It's like, where is this? Do you think you have the population support? Well, they don't have the population support. What they have is a system that allows them to do all of this between elections where we have no say.
Of course.
It's the same thing. It's completely against what the system was supposed to be. But they get away with it.
They do. And again, here we have an ex-president who, is about to be indicted as we're chatting here.
Today, yes, he has to surrender today.
But it's I think the thing that makes me craziest in dealing with these people who do not wish to change their mind. There was a woman, an anti-feminist woman named Phyllis Schlafly. I'm surprised that even in America, a lot of people, younger women, don't know who she was.
Oh my God, I remember Phyllis Schlafly, believe you me. I got told that they were doing, the week that my show came out, it was like a memorial thing because it was an anniversary of hers, right? And so it was juxtaposed. And I was interviewed for a newspaper who said that I was the very person that she would be against, and that I was single-handedly getting rid of the Christian way of life. I just.
Yep. I had a dinner after doing a show down in Atlanta when CNN, which of course now is everywhere, but it used to just have kind of homegrown shows down in Atlanta if you wanted to be on it. And there was an extraordinary woman named Sandy Freeman, and she used to have 3 guests every night, and they talk about this one issue. None of this, okay, 3.5 minutes, let's go. So afterward, Phyllis and I and a woman who ran something called the Committee to Free Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And that woman had a large purse, and she used to carry Soldier of Fortune magazine with her. And I says that to scare away potential boyfriends, and she laughed. So Phyllis, this happens on television a lot. You have the debate, and then you go out, you have dinner, and it's much more interesting what is said at dinner than what is said on the television. So I said to her, Phyllis, are there no principles? Are there no relationships in a marriage that you think ought to be open to everyone? Are you rigid about that? Men do this, women. And she said, well, there might be some, but once you open that door, then all kinds. I said, give me an example. She said, men should take out the garbage. And I mean, she grew up, she was outside of Chicago. And I said, well, wait a minute, because I really didn't know what she was talking about. I said, men should take, why is that? And she said, because there might be animals out of the can. Animals. What, escaped elephants, zoo monkeys, squirrels? I mean, it was
Raccoons. There might be
There could
raccoons.
be. Raccoons. We once, we're kind of animal lovers, and we had a raccoon who was trapped in our attic. So we got one of these big have-a-heart traps.
Yeah.
We caught it, and then we drove one Saturday night out on the parkway near outside of Washington to let it loose where it obviously had come from. We pull in, police car comes right after us. We park in the first parking lot. We open the trunk. Our hands are on the have-a-heart trap, and a police officer who has his hand on his gun says, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're leaving this raccoon out where it obviously came from. That's a federal law. You cannot release an animal." I said, "We're not trying to release, a tiger. We're trying to take this animal. You can't do that. And if you argue, I'll arrest you." So we put the raccoon and the raccoon cage back in the trunk. We drove to the next place, and he followed us. And he followed us farther and farther and farther till we found a farm, which we knew because our daughter was riding horses at the time. We went to that farm, let out the raccoon. But raccoons are not, if you mess with them or they're babies, they get mad. If you don't, they are not a danger to humanity.
But the reason that men have to do it is because women are afraid of animals. I mean,
Of course.
my mother would have said that my father takes the garbage out. My mother would say this, I believe. My father would take the garbage out when he was alive because she didn't want to deal with the raccoons at the cans.
Whoa.
Right?
Wow.
But that seemed perfectly, she said, if we do a trade-off, he does that, I do other things.
Exactly.
I don't want to deal with it. We had a groundhog. We had a groundhog that every year would come up and come by the deck. Anyway, it was creating havoc. So they hired somebody to come with the have-a-heart trap, took the groundhog, 30 miles away where it came from. And the same groundhog came back 6 times. And she was like, "We're not hiring anybody anymore because, they just feel like they're getting a vacation and then they come back."
Sure. It's a little bit like sensors. I have frequently said, and I'm sure it's in one of these books, sensors are like the dog that comes up to your place when you're sitting out on a patio and a dog comes up and you go, "I'm sorry, the dog looks like it needs some food. I think I'll give it a bite of my sandwich." And then, but do not be surprised, because that dog, just like sensors, are going to come back the next day and the day after that because they have an expectation. If you gave them something, or in the case of sensors, you got rid of something, they will never, ever be satisfied.
That's a beautiful thing to end on. But before we do end, I want you to tell people where they can find the book, where they can find you, and your podcast. And I will put that, end up in the notes as well.
Yeah. The easiest way to get this book is to go to I have to spell this out. I never even heard of it. bit.ly/Barry Lynn book. And it takes you to the publisher's webpage where you can get a discount if you buy all 3 volumes. And I also do have a website called barrywlynn.com. And on it is that interview with the Reverend Rob Schenck, an interview with Bill Baird, who is literally the creator of the concept of constitutional privacy. He's in his 90s. He has almost been scrubbed from the history books, including by some people on the left. But and there's a bunch of, and there's a thing I did, I don't know if I talked about this the last time, but I was they had a big retirement party for me when I retired. 3 weeks later, I nearly died. I had a serious heart condition. I didn't know I had it. So I nearly died. But Lewis Black, the comedian, I was writing little funny things on Facebook because although it was not a fun period of a month, but he said,
It's part of how you cope.
yeah, he wrote me, he said, Barry, I'm doing this show in Washington. Why don't you come and at the end, just do a rant, because he does these rants at the end of his shows. And I said, look, I'm not even sure I can speak because I'd lost my ability to speak. He said, I don't care if you have to whisper it, just do it. And it was really, and that's up too on that. And I sound like I don't have much of a voice at the time because I didn't, but it was really eye-opening. I have 3 lessons that I'd like to leave people with. If you care about a cause, you can never give up on it. No matter how controversial, if you think you are right, you can never give up on it. Then you can never do this work on your own. You need the people that will support it. And finally, you can never forget that there are real people behind whatever cause it is that you're trying to promote. It's the reality. If you do, as I did, changes the Vietnam veterans' terrible treatment, including from the US government. And there was a way to make sure they could get VA benefits. And I worked in a genuinely bipartisan way on this. But it wasn't until a Native American guy called me one day, he'd seen me on television, he said, I have this terrible thing happen to me. And he described it, and it's in the book, and he's the real person. It wasn't just theoretical. And no matter what you care about, if you care about sex workers and their right to organize, if you care about censorship and why it's bad under any circumstance, then you have to never forget that if you mess up, if you screw things up, it's not just you lost something, people will get hurt. Those are
That's
rules.
perfect. That is a perfect thing that I want to underscore for people, because it's what happens is that people do forget that a lot of, particularly in any legal arena, a lot of things become intellectual debates. There's a lot of intellectual debate about a lot of things that doesn't actually look at the real person's experience. And the one thing I would add to that is that remember that your viewpoint, as valid as it is not the only one. And that it's really going to do justice to whatever the issue is. If we could learn tolerance, we could learn to respect what each other wants and treat each other the way we ask to be treated, not the way we think we should be treated. Not based on our own. I don't treat you as I want to be treated. I should be treating you as you want to be treated. And you should treat me as I want to be treated. A lot of this stuff would clear up if we did just that. Just remembered the real people and the real stories.
You got it.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys, again for listening. And next week, the letter is Y. As always, if you have somebody you want to hear or a topic you want discussed, email me at drloribeth@drloribethbisbey.com. And I'm still running a monthly lottery. You get 30 minutes of free time with me if your name is chosen out of the basket of people who have written a review. This continues to be an issue. People still don't like writing reviews, but it is actually really helpful when people write podcast reviews and when they write book reviews. If you write a book review, you're welcome. I'm also usually have a few free signed books to give away. So that's another thing that you could get if you write a review. If you have a single question you want answered, I cannot guarantee I will answer it on the show, but I'll put it in my list of things for when I eventually do a Q&A show. If it's urgent, you can go on my shop at drloribethbisbey.com and you can choose to have it answered by email or have it answered by video. Yes, there is a charge for this service, but I cannot tell you how many questions I get asked. And if I could spend my entire time answering individual questions. So if you want something to do with your individual situation, please do purchase one of those and I'm happy to do it. If you're patient and happy to wait, just send me the question and it does go in a file, and every few months I do a at least 1 or 2 Q&A shows, and you can get it there. Thanks for listening, guys. Keep safe, have fun, and I'll see you all next time.
Thanks for tuning in. You were just listening to the A to Z of Sex, or the A to Z of Sex if you're in North America. If you enjoyed the show, please do leave a review wherever it was you listened to it, but especially head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Reviews really help the show get out there. If you want to support my work, you can support it through my Patreon page. That's Dr. Lori Beth Bisbey on patreon.com. You can also head over to drloribethbisbey.com and subscribe to my free mailing list, which will keep you updated as to the activities I am getting up to and any special appearances. For people who subscribe to the Patreon, there are special broadcasts, merch, and the opportunity to get discounted tickets to a lot of the events that I do. Knowledge gives you power. The more you know, the better your relationships, the better your satisfaction and joy. If you've got suggestions for the show, comments, or questions, do email at loribeth@drloribethbisbey.com, and I will try and incorporate them. Have a wonderful week filled with loads of joy.